Hi, this is Jeff Evans from Evans Performance Academy. We're going to be taking a look at some basics with our PC Link software so you can get started with your Link G5 or G4X system. Without further wait, let's jump in to check this out. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at doing a PC Link software overview in this training module, getting more familiar with the features and functions and layout of our software they're going to be working with in our G5 training course. Now, the very first thing we're going to do is explore the drop-down menus at the very upper left-hand corner of our screen. So we see File, Options, ECU Controls, Display Mode, Layout, View, Logging, Tuning, and then finally Help. So we're going to go through what all of these have to offer and just briefly talk about each subject, so to speak, in each drop-down menu here. So you get a better idea as to how that software is going to work again, and just getting more familiar with things. Now you can always play around with the software on your own after the training module and just get more familiar with things as well. But again, this is going to just give you the introduction to the software. Okay, so the very first thing we're going to do here is go up into the File option. We have a couple things in our File dropdown. We have Open, allows you to open another file in your PC Link software. But right now, I am connected live with my G5 box, so I'm key on, engine off, sitting in my vehicle. We can see I am online. We can see that state right there, so I'm connected via USB to my laptop to the G5. In this case, I don't want to go in and open another file to review. I could review a file in the offline mode. I could also open a file so that I could import it into the link and bypass everything that's here within my G5. So for right now, I'm not going to do anything. We're going to be looking at working with calibration files in the next training module, getting a little more specific with things, understanding how to upload a calibration file, how to review a calibration file in the offline, also going in and using the save and save as well as save as encrypted options. So these are going to allow you to save the file that is currently loaded into the link. Pretty simple there, but again, we're going to talk about file saving and file structuring in the next training module. Get into that a little bit more heavily. There's a compare feature. The compare feature allows you to compare another calibration file to the file that you have loaded in your link. Now you can do this in the offline mode or online, as I'm in right now. Online means we are connected to our link and the file that's in the link is displayed here up on our screen, so we can compare another file to what we have in our link. Or we can be in the offline mode where we're showing offline here. We're not connected to the link. We could have any file open and we can compare another file against that. This is a really handy option to see the differences between two calibration files. It's especially important if you're trying to figure out the differences. Let's say one file's running the engine quite well and another file's having a problem. Maybe you're trying to develop and you're trying to figure out the differences. The compare will highlight every single difference and you can spot trends or the problem very quickly. So compare is something we will take a look at in the next training module, but understand that it is there and you can find it right in this dropdown. There is a show memo option. The show memo allows you to make notes in the calibration file. So this is going to go along when we do a file and we save the file. This memo will be tagged with the calibration file. I like to populate in the memo what is done to the modifications that are done to the vehicle, the fuel system, ignition system, any details that would be relevant or pertinent to calibrating and tuning. So if you go back, open up the file, you'll know exactly what was done to the vehicle, modifications, and any notes that you left. Might be spark plug gap or base fuel pressure that you set in the vehicle. Very, very handy option here in the memo. I'm not going to populate anything here right now, but let's go ahead and close that. Just note that that memo option is there. Now there is an exit option. This is the same thing as going up here and just clicking the X and closing out of the software. So we don't need to do that. We can just click the X and exit out. Okay, under the options, there's a connection option here. The connection option allows you to do connection mode, manual, or auto. Typically, we're going to leave it on auto, and the connection port we're going to leave on USB. Now, we can alternatively with the G5 product only. So we know the G5 software can work with the G4X products. In the G5, they have an antenna for Wi-Fi. We can actually work in a Wi-Fi environment instead of being connected and tethered with a USB cord. In this case, we would choose Wi-Fi as our option out of here. We're going to take a look at setting that up in a separate training module. Right now, I am connected to USB. It's just easy, quick to get your connection established, and you actually need to be connected first with USB to be able to enable the Wi-Fi to go
wireless communication between your laptop and your Link G5. So we can see some of that connection modes right here. So we typically want to have it on auto and USB. Under preferences here, they're starting full screen mode. We can see that's not toggled on. We can leave that off. Hide runtime values on settings. We can see that is toggled on, so it allows you to toggle some things on or off. Search on enter key press. That's another option that's toggled off right now. Automatically save the layout. That is something we want to have checked on. So we've talked about the layouts. The layouts are going to be our pages that are displayed here. If we automatically, or we make changes to our pages and our layouts, we want it to automatically save to a file so that we don't have to worry about losing any of the updates and changes we've made to our layouts over time. So we definitely want to have that saved. We can see the font size, it can be changed. The view of the font can be changed. Typically leave that alone, but we can change all this. Now the units, we've talked about this in a previous training module. This allows us to customize if we're in the metric or imperial option. We can go ahead and, in my case, I like to look at pressure in kPa, lambda is in lambda units, but distance, temperature, and speed in our imperial or standard units. So get a little bit creative here when I work with the software, just what I'd like to look at in units. You can configure that right here. Directories, this is important. You can change where the files are going when you save for a base map, so where it's going to source for the directory, for the log files when you save it, where it's going to go, and then the layout files, where it's going to go. Now we typically don't want to change the default options, but you are able to do that. We can see right now it's pointing towards the PC Link G4X folders for my particular locations because I use G4X and G5 now. I'm starting to get into this training course. I'm using G4X pretty heavily, so I wanted to still source and look at my G4X folders because I'm using the software in kind of a dual mode with the G5 and G4X. So we can see that allows me to change the directories where it's going to automatically save files to. Really important that you get this sorted out because it makes your workflow much easier, and then you know where everything's going in these folders. All right, let's click cancel here since I don't want to change anything there. Going back in here, again, preferences, we talked about that. Directories, we just talked about that. Color theme, we discussed that in our last training module. We know we've changed the color and the way things are going to be displayed on the screen. I think this is a little bit easier to look at, just personal preference. Units here, we know we can select metric, imperial, or the options brings you back into the preferences so you can change things that custom units. Right now I'm just selecting on metric since I have that set up kind of configured custom. Language is only English right here, and then set up ECU parameters. Taking a look at this allows you to take a look at any of what's known as a runtime value. Runtime values are things that we display in our screens here. They are not tunable values, but they're a value associated with a calculation or function within the ECU's operation. So these would be known as logging channels for data purposes. We can use them for tuning, or we could use them for logging. The parameters option here would be for strictly logging purposes. All right, let's go here to ECU controls. Now under ECU controls, we see disconnect and search for ECU. If I want to disconnect or reconnect to my link, I can toggle F3. That'll go from online to offline, back to online again, assuming that my link is powered on and it's ready to go. So we can find that right here. Search for ECU allows you, if you're not automatically prompting up with your USB port, let's say you can search for it, or in your Wi-Fi, allows it to search for the ECU, just puts it into a search mode. Now the update firmware, we've talked about that already. We've updated the firmware on our G5. This is something you always want to do anytime you're downloading a new software version from Link. There is a clear ECU fault code. Now, the Link will store faults. If you have any kind of faults in the wiring or sensors or any fault in general, it'll store that into a list. And we can actually see that here in what's known as our event log. In here, we can see that we have all of these different fault codes generated. Now, I haven't set up anything on my G5. So, meaning I haven't set up the inputs or outputs or any table configurations, nothing specific to the engine and the vehicle I'm trying to tune right now. I have a generic file, load it, and I haven't assigned these inputs or outputs, and we're seeing that we're getting codes, low value errors here. In this case, we can actually clear the ECU faults. So if we go back in here, we see the clear ECU fault codes in our dropdown. We can find that same functionality right here. So if I clear them, we're going to say clear, yes. it's going to go ahead and clear all the fault codes out. Now, they are going to come back again because we haven't assigned anything, and they're not going to be working correctly. So I anticipate that the codes will start to generate again, and we could check them in that event log if you'd like. But that allows you to erase it from here or erase it from your event log on the side here. Okay, so we have ECU log file setup and ECU log file download. This allows you to set up the onboard logging option within the G5. This is something that you definitely want to do in racing conditions, so you're logging all the pertinent channels and data, so when you come back into the pits, you can review everything. We're going to have a separate tutorial on working with this, so for right now, we're not going to touch on this, but this allows you to do the setup for the logging channels and then download the log files when you're coming back into the pits, or even when you're, let's say, driving on the road or on the dyno. You want to download that data out. You don't want to have your laptop hooked up to the G5 constantly logging. This is going to be what you work with here, your ECU logging or onboard logging. Now there's a CAN setup window. The CAN setup allows you to set up any CAN modules on CAN 1 and CAN 2. We will be having specific tutorials setting up things like CAN Lambda, the PDM module from Link, CAN Keypad. So we're going to go through a couple different examples so you can see how this is going to work and just in general working with this CAN setup. I'm not going to cover it right now, but just understand that's where we are going to be able to find that. Let's go down here a little bit further. There is an area here called ECU statistics. This is really, really nice. If we click on this real quick, Control D is the alternate if we want to bring this up. This shows you all of the pertinent channels that could have a maximum value. Taking a look here, RPM, for example, or traction control, or maximum map pressure, maximum engine speed. So the counts mean how many times a limiter has been hit in a runtime or a run cycle with your engine. And then we have the maximums here. These show you the highest of the channels that we typically want to keep our eye on. For example, coolant temperature, air temperature, map pressure, engine speed. This gives you all of the information. Now, it's going to always store and reset itself to the maximums, meaning if we don't clear this out and you drive it around for a year, it'll store whatever the maximum or the counts are going to be for that entire year of operation. If you're going on racetrack or if you're going to be doing any kind of spirited driving, you probably want to go in and reset this. And that's where you can jump down into your menu here and you can go in to the clear statistics. This clears out the stats in our window here. It is something that I would recommend to do every so often so you can kind of keep track of worst case scenarios within all of your basic operation fields here. So this is something that you may or may not want to look at, but I do look at it from time to time. It is useful in some situations for troubleshooting. So I just wanted to mention that is in that drop-down menu, and that is the purpose of the statistics window. All right, ECU controls, let's go take a look here. Now, store to ECU, very, very important option here. When we're making our updates and changes with our link. So right now I'm in the online state. I make a bunch of changes to, let's say, my fuel and my spark timing table. Then I key off and I don't store the changes. The link will not technically natively store the changes. So it's not doing a constant writing process. In order to make sure that the changes we're making when we're connected to the link, as we're updating and tuning, we want to make sure that we're hitting Control S, which performs what's known as a store, that stores the changes in any table data or parameters in the ECU into the permanent memory on the link so it doesn't get lost. If we don't do a store to ECU option, when you go in, turn off the key, you will lose whatever you've just changed in the link. Now, technically speaking, when we key back on again, so we repower up the link, it will say there's a discrepancy between what's found on the link and what's on your laptop. Do you want to use what's on the ECU or do you want to use what's on your laptop? So it knows there's a difference and it's going to ask you that and allow you to choose if you want to load what's on your laptop that may not have made its way onto the actual link because you forgot to store it. But get in a habit of doing Control S as you're going through and calibrating and tuning so it's storing the change to the link. All right, so there's ECU unlock. We've talked about that, how to unlock the ECU. Restore to factory settings, pretty simple there. It's just initializing the entire link and putting it back to the default settings which is exactly what we're finding on the link right now. It has some kind of a default file on it. That way it shipped from link to me. So that'll return everything back to the default settings. It's probably useful. I've never used the feature, but if I was going to sell the link, sell the G5 to someone else, I don't want to initialize it. I don't want to keep the file in there. It's not going to be useful for them. So I'll go ahead and allow you to restore the factory settings or initialize. Now, there is a password protection option. So I'm not going to go through setting up the password right now, but this is where we would click on this and allows you to put a password in and confirm the password. Again, we're not going to do anything with that right now. There's an unlock password protection that allow you to take it off the file if you want. So keep that in mind. Now, there is a TPS setup and a map sensor calibration. This is something that has to be done before you even fire off your engine, anytime you're loading a new file to your link. You want to make sure that the throttle position's calibrated. Things like idle control and overrun fuel cut rely on having a properly calibrated TPS sensor. The map sensor calibration is very important. This makes sure that your map sensor and the baropressure sensor are matching each other, key on, engine off. Very, very important that your map sensor isn't out of calibration, or you can run into a slew of problems when you're tuning. So both of these will be something that we go through in future training modules, but they are located right here. There's a trigger scope option. The trigger scope is an oscilloscope that's built into the software. This allows you to capture your trigger on scope 1 and 2, or trigger 1 and 2. Trigger 1 is your crank sensor. Trigger 2 is your cam sensor. We'll have a dedicated video on actually working with this. This is extremely useful to detect what's going on for things like an arming voltage threshold for a crank or a cam trigger for a reluctor style sensor. Or if you want to check the pattern, let's say on your engine, maybe you're unsure what kind of cam and crank pattern your engine has. This allows you to do that, and we can also detect things like a reluctor sensor is putting out a sine wave. We can figure out if it's a rising or a falling edge trigger using our scope. So there's a lot of things we're going to be using our trigger scope for, and again, we're going to cover that in future training modules, but that's going to be where we find our trigger scope. Okay, display mode. Now the display mode, we can see right now we're selecting on ECU. There's also log analysis. The log analysis side, if we click that, allows you to do more data analysis. The ECU side of things allows you to see data and information, but it's more focused on actually tuning and calibrating here. So we can see it's going to allow us to do kind of the mixture of both. They both have their purpose. I tend to stick to more of the ECU side on the displayed mode, but we're able to switch back and forth here between ECU and log analysis. This is going to be where we do that. Again, we'll talk about log analysis in the future. Layout. Under layout here, this allows you to select the different pages found within a layout. So a layout is a combination of all of our pages, and then the pages are going to be the individualized focused areas for tuning. This is the link layout. So for example, here in injectors, this is going to give us information to be able to program our injectors. And it allows you here under the layout, we can simply select different options from here, going down in our drop down, or we can go up here and click through. We can see right here, and we have an arrow right here. This allows us to toggle through that window if we keep clicking on that little arrow, and we can go backwards here, go back in the other way. So we have the ability to access different areas for the layouts, different ways to go through that information. Now, there's a new layout, allows you to create a completely fresh layout. We'll talk about creating our custom layouts and how to do all of that in another separate training module. Load layout allows you to load a pre-existing layout. I showed you how to do that in the previous training module using a link layout. Now I'm supplying a layout for the training course, which again, we're going to cover dedicated training module for that. We'll be talking about how to go in and load that layout, but this is going to be where you find that. Save layout as allows you to save the file. So if you're making changes to your layout, allows you to save it as a new name. There's a new page, delete page, rename page that allows you to change your pages found within the layout. So again, when we get into the tutorial doing custom layout and design, we'll talk about how to work with this. View. This allows you to take a look at some specific things. We can see right here, ECU settings. Go back in here to log file manager. That flips back and forth here on the sidebar. We see parameters that allows you to go in and access those runtime values. Event log, again, we know we can clear our codes out doing that. So this gives you the ability here to go through a couple different things on the side pane. Now, if you don't want the side pane open, you can just simply click the X here and we can collapse it again, and now we can see everything on screen. And we can bring that back up on screen if we'd like. So we can just click on that, brings up ECU settings or the parameters or event log, log file manager. We can close that out. Again, allows us a nice kind of compacted way here to look at the information on those, and we can access that really quickly. Same thing again, we can just move back and forth between these two. So nothing really complicated with that, but I wanted to mention it. All right, let's go over here to logging. Now this is going to be associated for data logging, specifically laptop data logging or retrieving data log files. Now when we do a data log, that's going to be capturing the runtime information. Runtime channel is going to be something like engine coolant temperature, engine RPM, ignition timing. There's tons of runtime channels. That allows us to capture all of the information as the engine's running into a log file and then play it back. You can think of a data log file as a recording, such as a video. You're playing it back to review things. So same kind of idea with that. We're capturing the data to a specific file, and then we can use the playback features in our software. So it allows us to save a log file, open a log file, close a log file, and then we can give log file details. We see there's no log file open, nothing to assign to that, but allows us to kind of work with that. There is an export feature to export the data log file to a CSV, and we can use something like Virtual Dyno software to do a generation of estimated horsepower and torque of what the engine is making. Kind of a third-party application. We're going to be getting into that in another training module. There's a play, record, stop option that's for data logging. Setup logging allows you to set up your onboard logging. ECU log file download allows you to download that onboard logging. We've talked about that a little bit earlier. There's some options right in here. Allows you to get into some of that right here into the ECU controls, but we can find that same kind of information right here. Now within this window, there's a navigator, time plot, logged values list, XY plot, vehicle plan, parameters list, histogram, statistics. These will allow you to bring up a specific window in your page layout to add this on. So for example, XY plot, we can see here if I go through the setup and configuration and click OK, it'll generate that XY plot that I can use in my page layout. I'm not going to do anything with that, but this gives you the ability to set that up and be specific with these options right here. Under tuning, we have a couple options. All of these are pretty important. Runtime values. The runtime values allow you to see all of the information within the ECU. So the runtime is our individual channels, and it really is a quick peek into things like ignition timing or fuel. You can see everything related to fuel here. Auxiliary functions, so these are outputs, digital inputs, analog inputs, general. We can keep going through here. This gives you every single runtime value in a structured and organized list. So this is really important. This is something that I do pop into and taking a look at as I'm working with a Link G4X or a G5. So let's go ahead and collapse that and keep that in mind. And again, the runtime values are things that we would normally be data logging, but sometimes, let's say in our layout here, we don't have every single runtime value. So it's not practical to have that. This gives you the ability to toggle in here and see, let's say you're doing your fuel tuning and you want to see something related to ignition. You could pop this window open and take a look at that as you have other bits of information being displayed in a page layout. So it gives you kind of a master overview and keeping things organized related to ignition or fuel or inputs or outputs allows you to see that really quickly. Very, very handy tool in the software. Tuning, quick tune. The quick tune function allows us to dial in our fuel table when we're in open loop. So we're not using closed loop feedback. This will make more sense as we go through the training course. But this is an option that works very well if you're able to drive the car engine in a controlled environment such as the dyno. You can populate and dial in your fuel table very, very quickly and very effectively. And we'll be demonstrating that as we go through here. So that's going to be a tuning option. There's a mixture map. That's another way that we're able to take log data and put it into what's known as the mixture map and dial in our fuel table. So it's an alternative way to do things more not live, so to speak. So that other option, going back in here, quick tune, that's more of a live option. Mixture map is more kind of an offline collecting data and then populating it in and then making updates and changes offline. There's knock audio. This is going to be for a internal mic for your laptop, bringing in the knock data. I don't usually work with this, so probably not going to be covering that. There's other options for working with knock control. There's some other options here. Reset all tuning markers. There's ways that we can actually add markers in the tables to know where we've operated at in specific areas. Undo short-term changes. This will undo any changes that aren't stored to the link. So this is kind of an undo all. As you're going in and tuning, maybe you're not happy with something, we can just undo it. Instead of doing Control Z, which is edit undo, we can do undo short-term changes, same idea. Under the help here, this is the last thing we're going to take a look at, there is a content section. This is packed with a tremendous amount of very well documented information. I refer to this myself quite often. So for example, here under the contents, if I'm unsure, let's say of wiring information, I can find it for every single box that Link makes. We can get the header pinouts. Here, for example, is just one very, very kind of basic functionality here. If I go to the search function, it allows me to search through all of the documented information from Link. So let's say I'm trying to figure out how to set up a CAN Lambda. If I go to list topics, it'll give me all the information based on my search terms. So if I want to go here to user CAN setup, I can actually go in and take a look at how to set up CAN devices, and it gives me all of the specific information. Now we will be going through some of the more common options for setting up Link CAN devices or CAN devices in general, but if you're trying to find some information maybe we don't cover in a tutorial, you can jump in here and search. Now it's not going to be obviously just CAN Lambda, it's going to be any single topic within the ECU. So you can look up anything and you can go through and find pretty well documented information. Link does a tremendous job in this online manual here. All right, let's click close. Go back here to help. Keyboard shortcuts. This is something that you probably want to get familiar with. I will be going through and using quite a bit of these shortcuts in the training modules, and I will be describing what I'm using and how I'm using them as I'm going through and setting up tables or setting up parameters. The keystrokes or shortcuts are, again, very, very useful, and this list allows you to learn them as you go through here. And I don't know all of them, but I know the ones that are the most important doing editing and calibrating. All right, let's close that out. Under help here, there's wiring information. The wiring information gives you the wiring pinouts. I just demonstrated here the Voodoo Pro, for example. That gives us the G5 Voodoo Pro pinout. We can see that right here, so we can grab those very quickly if we'd like. We can find, again, just a kind of a quick wiring information here. ECU fault codes. This, again, is something that you would find in your online manual, in your help, but you can quickly hone in on what the fault codes mean. So you can go through all of the fault codes here, the number and what it's associated to, and being able to kind of troubleshoot things with your Link. Let's go back in here to help. And then there's ECU information. This tells me all of the information on my specific G5. In this case, I'm connected to my laptop and I'm working with here, so we can see all of that. Click OK. And then lastly here, about tells you what PC Link software version you're on and your build date. Sometimes this information is important if you're working with Link on doing troubleshooting. Maybe you're having some kind of a problem. They're going to want to know what software version and firmware build you're on, and this will tell them that information. So you'll find that right here. All right, let's click OK. All right, so that's going to be wrapping it up here, taking a look at a basic software overview. So we know we can find a lot of information here in our drop-down menus. Things are organized pretty well in the software. There's redundancy, so you're able to find certain features and functions in the drop-down, and also, let's say, in the navigation bars here on the side. Sometimes even drop-downs are redundant. So ECU controls here, for example, you can find your ECU logging right here for the onboard logging. You can also find that in here as well. So kind of dual functionality here in some aspects of the software. There's a lot to learn here. Don't be overwhelmed. Again, just a very basic overview of the software. Play with the software offline, get used to it, get familiar with it, keep rolling through our tutorials here. Any comment or questions on anything we cover in this training module, post your comment or questions into the video comment section or into the private forum. It's going to wrap it up here. I'll see you guys now in our next training tutorial.
Thanks for watching our tutorial. If you're interested in learning more about how to tune your Link G5 or G4X system, check out the video description below where you can find links to our school, some promo codes to get you started and save some money. If you're interested in learning more about Link Engine Management products, also check out the video description below. That's going to wrap it up here. I hope to see you guys in our school.